This episode of the Necronama.com is brought to you by the Nightworms Book Club. Each month, Nightworms puts together a package of horror books, magazines, and other freebies and sends them directly to your door. We're not talking t-shirts that you're never gonna wear or more coffee mugs than you know what to do with. With Nightworms, you'll receive at least 2 physical horror books and some original artwork. Any added extras on top of that will be unique enough that you'll actually enjoy having them. The fun doesn't stop there, though. If you use their hashtags and leave an honest review of any of the books included in the order, you can win additional items. Head on over to nightworms.com to learn more. I am James Sabata. I am an award-winning screenwriter, author, host of this podcast that you're listening to now, along with my good friend Don Guillory.
Hello, everybody who's out there listening. I am Don Guillory. I'm a history professor, historian, writer, world traveler, lover of horror films, and deep discussions. And James and I are hosting this show where we will discuss and analyze horror films and the social commentary that they include.
John Carpenter is one of my guiding lights when it comes to social commentary, so I knew that's where we had to start. But it was a question of which way to go. So many of his films still hold up today. Many are more relevant today than when they were released. Like, do we start with The Thing? It's a story of absolute paranoia and wondering who's our friend and who isn't. Even if they look like the same people we've always known and loved, people we've known forever, and now we find out they might be monsters. I mean, that's pretty relevant today. Do we go with Escape from LA? That's a story of political upheaval that leads to a new president who literally builds walls around people he deems insufficiently American. He vomits fiery rhetoric directly to his supporters through broadcast updates. His rules are impossible to follow because they change every day with his mood. Also pretty relevant. What about Precinct 13, where we could explore relations between the police and the general public? Maybe Prince of Darkness, which basically teaches us that the apocalypse is something we'll watch on our screens until it affects us directly. But no, there was only one right choice to jump into this podcast. John Carpenter's 1988 classic, They Live. They Live is a scathing indictment of capitalism and the culture of greed, masquerading as a B-movie about aliens invading Earth. Starring former pro wrestler Roddy Piper, the film follows the nameless man who receives special sunglasses that allow him to see the truth all around him. Roddy can look at any ad around him, whether it's a woman in a bikini, and instead, with the sunglasses, he sees marry and reproduce. When he looks at ads in the magazines or newspapers in front of him, they tell him to obey or continue to sleep and not put up a fight. But the glasses also give him the ability to look at humans around him, and he starts to see that many of the people that we interact with daily are monsters. And so, Don, you want to jump in here and get us started?
Of course. The film itself, of course, to build off of everything that you brought up, the film itself is, I don't want to say odd as far as its origin, but it's interesting because you and I talked about this before, the idea of casting and then how the movie was going to be shot, and then, of course, having these discussions that take place within the film. That are discussions that we could easily be having now in 2019 as opposed to 1988 about consumerism, capitalism, or unregulated or deregulated capitalism itself, class consciousness, class warfare. To an extent, you could even argue racial superiority and inferiority with respect to the aliens themselves, where I think at one point one of the aliens says to Nada, Roddy Piper's character, is like, "Oh yeah, you guys look just as ugly to us as we do to you." Just this whole idea of this perspective of why they feel entitled to kind of be at the top of I guess this social or this species ladder. But just that whole idea of Roddy Piper being picked for the film, and you brought this up in an early discussion that we had at one of the conventions, that he was intentionally picked because of kind of the spectacle behind it. I'm going to get somebody who has some notoriety. People are going to watch it just because he's in it, which we often do with movies.
Oh,
So and
absolutely.
so is going to be in this movie. I don't know anything about the plot, but he's in it or she's in it. I'm going to see it. Now, the movie might be complete garbage, but whoever did the casting decided, if I get this person into this movie, people are going to put their butts in the seats, buy popcorn, and sit there for 2 hours watching it. You know, I don't really need to tell you anything else. But for him, for Roddy Piper in this case, you know, I was a pretty, and I still am to this day, a wrestling fan.
We both
I
are.
like the show of it. Well, I don't want to speak for yourself, given current conditions within the world of pro wrestling. But the '80s were that great era where you had the rock and roll wrestling or rock and wrestling, where there was that mix of pop culture and uh, then at the time WWF. And so you had a lot of crossovers that were taking place where, Mr. T was going to WrestleMania, Muhammad Ali was a special referee, Cyndi Lauper was in the ring as well, and you had, of course, Hulk Hogan that was in Rocky 3, I believe, and Mr. T, of course, was in Rocky 3, both playing kind of bigger than life characters. Mr. T's character, Clubber Lang, a little bit darker than Thunder Lips, I think was Hulk Hogan's name.
Yes.
But when Roddy Piper was in this film, what it showed to me was, or at least what it said to me as, gosh, because it was on video, 11, 12 years old when my cousins and I saw it at the video store, our first thought was, oh my God, Roddy Piper's in this movie. It's got to be good. This has got to be cool. Because there was no point in the 1980s where you looked at a movie cover and said, oh, this movie is complete garbage or it's a B or C movie because X, Y, and Z is in here. I mean, one of the reasons why Nightmare on Elm Street became so popular was because of video stores. And the spectacle of video stores, or at least the novelty of video stores, was you could go in, see the box, judge it just like you would, a great ad or a poster for a movie, and say, I'm going to go watch this. Worst case scenario, it's just not a good movie.
Well, and I loved the ones where the cover had nothing to do with the movie because they knew that that's how we were judging it. Like it was never about what the back says. It was, oh my God,
Right.
look at this. I got to see this.
And that's what this movie did. It was, I'm going to see it. And as a result, I saw it, the late 80s, early 90s, whenever it was on video, or I might have even seen it on TV. But I remember seeing it, and my cousins and I were, we were so enthralled with the movie. It wasn't necessarily the whole aspect of the social commentary behind these aliens that have taken over Earth and have convinced people to consume and obey and not question anything, just become loyal consumers, mindless consumers. Our thought was, oh man, that fight scene was kick ass. That was awesome. And then we go outside and pretend to put the glass in each other without thinking about what that meant. And this film is one of those things where years later, if you're a kid when you watch it, you can watch it years later as an adult and see two different movies. Whereas a kid, I saw this guy kind of like any of the 80s action movies. There are these bad people. He's going after them. He's going to eventually, expose them. And then we cut to the credits. As an adult, you look at it and like, damn, there are like 50 layers wrapped it within another 50 layers that are then compounded by another 50 layers. So,
So
we
you're
could start
saying
off
that
talking about.
as an adult, you put on the sunglasses and then you saw the truth.
Well, I was going to say being exposed to the world became those sunglasses.
Absolutely.
As far as becoming older, getting more informed about things, knowing what to look for, despite what some of my English literature teachers would have said about my level of attention to simile, analogies, metaphors, all that good stuff. Yeah, it becomes this moment where, unlike one of my college professors, where you're trying to look for the phallic symbolism within the story, I'm looking for this idea of what does this really mean? What does it really mean to put on the glasses? And I guess we can start there because we got consumerism wrapped into this. You got this idea of breaking this I guess the trance that we've all kind of put ourselves under or been put under by, the shiny objects.
And the thing with the sunglasses that really appealed to me was how simplistic it is. It's pure symbolism of seeing the truth while being a literal representation of that. And if you go back to the short story that's, Ray Nelson, 8 o'clock in the morning? And in that, it's a hypnotist who basically teaches him to see the truth, and it's not a physical representation, so that's a change that Carpenter made. And I think that works really well with film, especially going to black and white, because the black and white is such a change from what we're used to. You go back to like The Wizard of Oz, starts out in black and white, and then you have the big color moment where all the joy and everything comes in.
Right.
And this literally strips that away. It's saying that all of that is filler. It's all extra stuff. And by taking that away, you make the world black and white, and then you see the truth. And I find that in and of itself to be fascinating. The sunglass scene, the first sunglass scene when Roddy Piper puts it on, that's probably my favorite scene of all. I love how quickly it explains everything as well. You instantly see it through his eyes, so it's making it feel like it's you seeing the truth for the first time as well. But it's also, we don't have a lot of explanation and all this extra stuff to show it. We literally just jump in and we hit it. And at the end of that scene, after he's looking at the posters and looking at the billboards and the newspapers and magazines and everything else, that's when he looks up and sees his first alien. And the guy is just buying a paper. He's not doing anything out of the ordinary. And he just looks at him and he's like, "What?" And that's it. And then Piper's just staring at him like, what the fuck is going on here? And that moment to me is so huge because that set everything up without a lot of work, if you will. I mean, it was a lot of work, but you know what I mean? Like, no extra stuff. And I love that.
Yeah, it tells you where everything is going, or at least gives you an idea of where things are going to go. And you get that explanation at the end. I think within like the last 10, 15 minutes, you really get an explanation from that Fox News Center type area where they're doing all the brainwashing, or at least the projection of the images.
Yes.
And, when you're watching the film, you start to realize, especially from that scene, you start to realize if he's just now seeing this, how long have they been there? Even when there's that the moment at the homeless camp at the beginning where he witnesses all this stuff going down at the church, and there is this sense of a resistance. There are people that know this is going on, and they're transmitting these radio signals to people to let people know what else is going on and what to look out for. How long have they been there?
Well, and they're the ones with the glasses as well.
Yes. And how do you convince other people about what's going on without kind of sounding like, any of the faux woke folks that are out there that'll tell oh, you're wrong because you do this, and they don't give you an actual reason as to why, whatever it is that you're following happens to be wrong, even if it is wrong. You're not going to be willing to listen to them if they're just kind of up in your face, very vocal, or at least too vocal for your taste, to listen to something that's going to break you out of this trance that you've been used to. It is comfortable, and it's just one of those things that you don't want to break away from, because you're here in this area where things are safe, you're warm, you're comfortable. And even though I'm ignorant to what's going on, as soon as you tell me that whatever I'm following happens to be wrong or incorrect, I'm not going to be as likely to follow along with you, because I don't know what else is out there. I'm already comfortable with this. I'm a Pepsi drinker. Don't tell me Coke is better, because I'm so comfortable with Pepsi. I'm already going to be against Coke. So if you happen to hand this to me, I might not want it, and I'm not going to agree with you that it tastes better. And that's kind of, even when those underlying things that comes out later, well, not necessarily comes out, but it can be analyzed later after the film, that whole idea of, brand loyalty, but then also that idea of truth loyalty, where you kind of question what the truth is at this moment. So if these aliens have been around for who knows how long, but they've been running the show for so long, Is their truth your truth? And is putting these sunglasses on now breaking from the truth, or is this now going to somehow shatter the world that you created? Because it's not going to change anything that they're doing. It's just going to change the way that you see it.
Well, and that's one of the things I love about this sunglass scene is it's not even a total awakening. Like, it works exactly the same way as any social awakening, if you will, works. It's this slight thing that happens that's jarring and changes his reality, but he also just sees one. Is it just that guy? Is he an alien? Is he a monster? Is he a zombie? Am I crazy? It's not necessarily widespread at that point. At that point, it's just, what the hell was that? Which then forces him to push harder, to follow up on it, learn more. And I find that very interesting. I don't know if Carpenter did that on purpose. I mean, clearly, it's also just a way of telling a story where you don't give everything away at once. But I think it works really well for that character's journey into this discovery as well.
Well, as far as what he's seeing with, the consume, obey, reproduce, all those things that are coming up, when you watch the film, you question, what has been your role in this? What do you mindlessly or blindly, I guess would be the appropriate metaphor to use. What do you blindly do on a daily basis? Like, what do you buy? What do you look at? What do you even if you're not purchasing it, but these ideas of what you consume, and does what you consume as far as material goods affect the way that you can consume, I guess, an image or the idea of something? It's something as basic as even like political parties or political ideology. A lot of us early on, before we have the chance to develop our own political ideology, we just latch on to whatever happens to not necessarily be popular, but at least what we're familiar with from people that we associate with. Sometimes it takes going somewhere else to actually teach you that, hey, not everything's like back home. There are lots of diverse people. There are differences of opinions. There's all these things that are going on. But there are at the root, at least in this film, there is at the root this idea of there is this baseline that everybody's kind of applied themselves to or adheres to, which is, if you're going to be a good, red-blooded American, you got to buy stuff. You have to have a new car, or you have to have your new car every couple of years. You have to buy a home. You have to buy certain types of clothing. You have to listen to certain types of music. There's these aspects of American society that are seen as not necessarily subversive, but un-American, and not necessarily in trying to undermine the fabric of America, but this idea of if you do it, you're seen as the odd one.
So, I don't watch basketball. And
Right.
For some people, that's really weird. And it becomes much weirder than if I just don't like the team that you like. My father-in-law is a huge Golden State Warriors fan. If you tell him that you don't like Golden State, then he thinks you're crazy. But he thinks I'm off the charts because I'm not even involved in basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's true with many other things. But the difference with, say, politics, when people say, oh, well, I don't pay attention to politics, the difference there is you're still allowing actual policy that's really changing people's lives and endangering lives, or changing people's rights or their ability to stay in the country or whatever else, just by ignoring. And in that way, you're being political. You're actively choosing to not be involved and not vote and not whatever else. Whereas not liking sports or not liking horror movies or whatever else, while it makes you a little bit of an outcast, it's not affecting everyone else.
Which would bring us back to, at least one of the signs, which is sleep.
Yes.
And that's really what it comes down to is all the politics, all the big decisions are being taken care of. Don't give a shit about any of this stuff. Don't pay attention to it. Just stay asleep. Which is an interesting thing to think about since, we have woke culture now, which I don't know if it's directly responding to this film, but at least responding to this idea of waking up to the way society is, the way politics are, the way that people are, and that you can't afford to sleep on whatever the political issues are, because even if they don't affect you, it's affected somebody. and it may be a life or death issue for some people. Whereas, it might just be a minor inconvenience for me, but we deal with clean water, or at least the idea of clean water, or climate change, where a good number of people will say things like, well, it's not really affected me. The summer has been a little bit warmer, but I haven't noticed any change in the last few years. It hasn't affected you directly, but it has affected people that are on coastlines, or at least people who are, at least in Europe, who are now experiencing the hottest summer on record. And you're dealing with parts of the world where they don't need air conditioning because it's always been a nice temperate climate. It might be a little bit warm, might get cool, might be cold in the winter, but it's definitely not, you're not talking about 100 plus degrees. And I think that's one of the things that Carpenter, whether he means to or not, kind of exposes it about the 1980s in that film, where there are a lot of people just look at it and say, no matter what I do, things I can't affect change. No matter what I do, the corrupt guys are in charge. And so maybe by putting that sleep thing in there, maybe it's an issue of people already know that things are screwed up. They don't necessarily know that the aliens are the ones that are doing all this stuff, or they might even know, because there are some humans that know the aliens exist and that they're running this stuff. But they look at it as, it's not bothering me. They're running a good show. As long as you don't get in their way, you have nothing to worry about. In fact, you know what? I'm going to work with them, and I'll make a little change off of this too, because I may as well benefit from it if they're going to be here, as opposed to allowing somebody else to have the financial windfall. Somebody's going to make some money off of this. It may as well be me. Maybe that's the whole idea behind that, not necessarily just being apathetic towards politics, but that idea of, I don't need to rock the boat. I'm going to let them do what they're going to do because they're going to do it anyway. Like of course, I forget the guy's name, but the gentleman at the beginning of the film who plays a homeless man in the camp, and in the end of the film, you see him in a tux. He's drinking brandy or scotch, and he's hanging out with all the aliens in that brainwashing center.
Yeah, I don't think he has a name. There's a lot of people in the film that don't, and he might be the one they refer to as Bearded Man. I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, okay. You have this entire camp of homeless people who were legitimately homeless people, because Carpenter filmed in a real community there, and there were all these people, and you can look at them and say none of them could make a difference, right? So you have the one who cashes out, like you just said, and he embraces it, and he's rewarded for it. There's no telling who he sold out to get there, and there's no telling what he sold of himself to get there. But clearly he did something to get there. Then you have Nada, who is the one person who makes a change. And I don't think that there's anything particularly special about Nada, and that's one of the things I love about him. I think it could have been anybody in that community that decided to make a difference. But then you have everybody who didn't do anything. And whether they were victims of the police raid, or whether that community's still standing after the movie's over, something had to happen to them at some point. So did their indifference cost them their lives? That's always been a big question to me. Just like, what happened to the rest of them? Are they still there doing nothing? I don't know. But
well, could just even be that idea of visibility of the homeless as well, because you have homeless camps themselves that get raided, that get pushed off because of different city ordinances. And I think Seattle or somewhere, somebody started an app to report homeless people, so the police could come over and then bust up their tents and kick them off the streets. Which it's one of those things that we've minimized them so much as a society, not individually. We've minimized them so much to where maybe Carpenter does this on purpose, maybe not. There is no revisiting of the homeless camp after Nada leaves. It's kind of like, well, do we really care about the homeless? Because if a homeless camp gets raided, or a homeless area gets raided and people are kicked out, or which even I think places like New York and LA, where the police will actually call out sanitation crews to come and confiscate the tents and all this other stuff that they have, and then throw them away, put them into the the garbage trucks, incinerators, and just basically tell these people to keep moving. And maybe that's one of the scarier things about the film is that these people that are voiceless become invisible. And there's no consideration to what's going to happen to them next. Not that there's necessarily a point of the film, but there's so much that goes down in that camp to begin with that at the end of the film there's really no sign of the camp other than Nada, Frank, and the bearded man.
So Piper purposely made his character have a backstory that only he knew. And he talked it over with Carpenter. Carpenter told him, don't ever tell me the backstory, but you need to know it. And Piper actually kept that until his death. Nobody knows Nada's backstory like Piper did. And Piper's whole point with that was, even as a community, homeless people are individuals. And at the end of the day, they're there for themselves. But that I personally think that that's true about a lot of society. So much society is about what does it take for me to survive? And what do I have to do to get to that next level? And when I move up, do I ever come back and look at the level where I was? I love that Piper built that into his character as well and paid so much attention to it, because I do think that it's such a huge commentary on who we are at any level. Like the top 1% are always looking out for themselves, and on some base level, so are the bottom 1%.
Well, yeah, it's an us versus them issue. And in this case, as you point out, it's not just an us versus them, it's me versus the world. And not in a positive way as far as like, hey, I'm out here, I'm gonna be fighting against the world to succeed and do well. It's if given the opportunity, somebody else in the world is going to take this from me. So I need to go ahead and do whatever I can. You can see this, which has become my new favorite form of people watching, which is reading Facebook comments whenever there is a political discussion. Oh, it's great. Whenever there is a political discussion, because a friend of mine out here had posted this thing. It was like, look, I'm not looking for an argument. I'm just looking for, why some of you still support Trump. Valid reasons why, not emotional, not, I want something as far as like this benefit. And so one of the people wrote on there, after giving this whole thing about, he tells it like it is and all these other things, goes in and speaks about how, or types out about how the tax cuts helped him. Now, that kind of goes back to this idea of with the bearded man's story or backstory, a possible future story. This idea that I'm getting something now that I'm not in those homeless camps. I don't need to worry about that shit anymore. I'm going to worry about making sure that these aliens are happy so that they can continue to make sure that my life is prosperous. And if I need to sell some more people out, I'm going to do it. And the same thing with respect to the detention centers that ICE is running. This idea that we have people who've been seeking asylum, refugees that have been coming to the United States, or at least filing for asylum, or some people who have been rounded up for whatever reasons, and they all get lumped in this thing of, well, they should have just come here illegally, and I'm not going to in any way empathize with their struggle. And what it really comes down to is, these people don't look like me, so they must have done something wrong. Or, I don't have to worry about any of that shit because I'm a citizen, so to hell with whatever problems they have. And as long as I'm a citizen, I don't have to worry about that. I'm not going to pay attention to it. And when there was, was coming out that some American citizens were being rounded up, there were people who immediately went to, how dare they do this to an American citizen, as opposed to how dare they do this at all. And that's kind of the great thing, again, as we've been talking about this film, this idea that there's so many things that get brought up, so many themes, so many issues that get brought up in this film that resonate today. Like George Orwell's 1984, Animal Farm, Fahrenheit 451, all these things that those books talked about and this film talked about are still thematic issues that we can be talking about in 2019 with respect to politics, society, perspective, class, any number of issues. And probably the scariest thing in this film for me, because I mean, we don't typically look at it as being like a horror film, but because it is kind of this dystopian thing. I can't remember what it was I think it was classified as like sci-fi action or something.
I believe so.
But I mean, the Terminator is sci-fi action, and you know what? That's a fucking horror movie.
Yep.
It's Frankenstein. But that idea that there are so many people that are willing to look the other way with respect to, genocide, slavery, immigration raids, any number of these things, because it's not their tribe, it's not their people, it's not their group. But if they are part of my group, or at least close to looking like me, well, damn it, if I have the chance to sell them out to benefit from this, I'm going to do it. And
we always have to find a way to show how they're still different from me,
yeah,
so it's okay.
Well, yeah, they're not the same as me. There's something that they did wrong, or there's something defective about them. So with that aspect of, unregulated capitalism, or, just rampant capitalism, there's that idea, you could argue, Beardo is one of these guys, because he looks like a caricature at the end of the film. Did I call him Beardo?
Yes, I love it. Keep going.
Beardo, he looks like a caricature at the end of the film because he's smoking a cigar, he's got a tux on, he's got a glass of scotch, and he's just going, and he's more refined at the end of the film as opposed to looking like a bum, a wino, how he's presented at the beginning. Now he looks like that asshole capitalist from every 1980s movie who basically says, how can I make more money off of this? How can I make money off of this? How can I benefit me to where there's less of a cost to me? I can make as much money as possible off of this, and then when the problem's gone, it's gone. And that's where he goes so far as to say, you know what? Say what you will about them. They know what they're doing. They're making a lot of money off of this. And, hey, don't rock the boat. Not my people. It's not me. It's not my family. It's not my friends. I'm not worried about it. You know what? I'm going to keep doing what these folks say because they pay good.
And I like how you brought up basically that people they'll start out against it, and then, I'm not a citizen, or I'm a citizen, so I'm fine. But then as soon as citizens are being rounded up, they're upset. And the reason for that is, wait, now it could be me. So then they have to go another level and find a reason that it can't be them, whether it's skin color or education or I don't live at the border. This is what you get for going to Mexico, bullshit like that. And I think that plays directly into this film as well. If you take one of my favorite scenes, the scene that everyone quotes, whether they've seen the movie or not, the bubblegum and kick-ass scene.
Right.
So Nada basically opens a cop car and pulls out a gun. And then he goes into a bank. Well, he's just trying to escape. He's trying to find somewhere safe to be. He's trying to get away from this and protect himself, which is what these people are doing. They're trying to protect themselves, whether any side of what we were just talking about. They're trying to protect themselves at the end of the day. So he's just trying to get away and do that. But as he walks in, he realizes, I'm in a bank, I'm a homeless guy, and I brought a gun. So clearly everyone there has the reaction any of us would have. And they freak out, and then one of the cops starts to shoot at him. But what's interesting about that to me is before Nada shoots the cop and kills him, they show you that the police officer is one of the aliens. Like, he's not high class, he's not super rich, but he is an authority figure, and he's one of the aliens. And I don't know if they did it so that it would be okay to shoot a cop and still be the good guy, or if they did it to show that it could be any authority, because Carpenter and myself have huge problems with authority as it is. And I always found that very interesting. And then, of course, there's the shootout and that whole scene. But I always just thought that was amazing that they made him one of the monsters as well. And then there's a couple in line as well.
The whole issue with authority for me, it wasn't even about it being an alien or a human. I think he wouldn't have shot a human police officer, or human in a police uniform, because I think there's another cop who is human and he doesn't shoot. But it's the idea that this is double troubling to where it's an alien in the police uniform. Uh, so he's definitely going to get treated differently from that guy, whereas the human one isn't going to understand what's going on. To the point where you have some of the aliens in that bank scene, and even another scene, the scene as they're going through the sewers or the oh gosh, wherever it was, to try and find that place. There's that idea that gets brought up that the aliens know this technology is out there, and it's one of the reasons why they're trying to stamp it out, or at least stop those members of the resistance. Because if you have people that are resisting your authority, they're going to question your authority and question your legitimate or challenge your legitimacy, and those are the ones that are most threatening. If I'm not going to follow your rules because I don't see you as a legitimate source of authority, you're going to try whatever you can to stop me from resisting. So you have those people who, they reach onto their wrist and they hit their bracelets like, hey, we got one that can see. And just this idea that those aliens know that people are out there that aren't bought in. And if you resist, and this would be a great time to, or at least a great way to kind of look at the 1980s as a redo or reboot of the 1950s. If you're not following what the masses are saying, you are somehow wrong. You don't fit in. If you're questioning authority, there's something defective with you. Or for women in the early 20th and late 19th century, that whole idea that if you dare to not want to have kids, or you question your husband or question your father, you must have some type of mental deformity or some type of mental disorder. But yeah, the whole aspect of authority with Carpenter in that film, and even with because it gets brought up in The Thing and even Escape from Los Angeles or Escape from LA, that whole idea of illegitimate authority. We have these people that are in charge, but we don't like what they're doing. With Escape from LA, there's all this rebellion that's taking place, and aside from Snake Plissken, but the idea that the people who are in charge are just fuck ups, or just very abusive of their power, and people are not questioning them. They're just kind of going along with it because that's what they're supposed to do. Why should I question authority? This person has this position of power, and because they have that position of power, I'm supposed to follow along what they say. And they might not be any more equipped to do anything in that job than you are. In fact, you might be more equipped to handle the rigor of that position, or the needs that are there.
And I think that people just need to be able to understand a little more of what's going on around them. And I mean that from any point on the political spectrum or anything else. We all get kind of caught up with where we are. And I find that one of the best things that I do, I have a very good friend, Scott, who's on the opposite side of the spectrum completely from me. And we get together every few weeks and we just talk. And there's no name calling, no you're stupid for believing this, none of that kind of stuff. We just kind of try to see where the other one's coming from. And I think that is such a huge thing that's missing in so much of American politics on every level. And I wish that somebody would pull everybody into an alley and beat the crap out of them and force some sunglasses onto them. Oh, hey, that brings us to the scene you wanted to talk about.
It's funny that you said beat the crap out of him, because I just pulled out my baseball bat as you were saying that. But, well, the question is, or at least the issue that you and I have discussed a few times before this, is two perspectives with respect to the sunglass scene. There's the sunglass scenes, or just the idea of the sunglasses themselves as being a tool to I guess not necessarily break from reality, but to break from the fantasy that's been created around you to enter into what reality is. And there's the piece with Nada's character Roddy Piper, where he puts the glasses on and he's not sure what's going on. He eventually figures it out, and as an audience member, or as the audience, you figure out what's going on as well. But then there's that idea of he runs into his friend. Well, his coworker Frank, and tells him, "Hey man, you got to put these sunglasses on." Just paraphrasing the scene. Frank doesn't want to put the sunglasses on. One, because he thinks not as crazy, or he's a loose cannon. He's somebody I don't need to hang around with, because if I do, I'm probably going to get into some type of trouble. So here's your money from working the job. Leave me alone. But the only person that Nada knows, or at least has contact with at this moment, is Frank, and pretty much the only person that he would trust. Goes to him, gives him or tries to give him the glasses, and then Frank resists. They have this nice fight scene, in which Frank is finally forced to have the glasses on. Not that he's wearing them, and not that he's putting them on, but he's forced to have the glasses on. And as he opens his eyes, he sees the aliens. I mean, he sees exactly what Nada had been seeing. And it's so shocking for him. It's kind of like, shit, what the hell's going on here? Not necessarily, you need to explain this to me, but now it's, oh my God, I see what was going on as far as what you were seeing or what you're talking about. Because Nada never tells him, hey, put these glasses on because you're going to see, the signs look different. You're going to see aliens. You're going to see all this other stuff. It's just, I need you to put these glasses on. I need you to see what I'm seeing. And as Frank puts them on, or excuse me, as Frank has them put on him, he sees that and then continues to wear them and realizes from continued interaction with Nada and then other members of that resistance that this had been going on for years. And of course they switched to the contacts, which is awesome, because now it's no longer this issue of you can tell as an alien or as a collaborator. It's not an issue of you can tell that these guys know because they have the special glasses on. They got contacts on, so they're going to look normal, or quote unquote normal to you. Where they don't see you as normal. They see the alien skin, or at least they see what your real image is. So for me, that whole scene with Frank, aside from the fight scene, was just an issue of you've got somebody who wanted to resist seeing stuff for so long. Because he was going about his life. He was working, he was earning some money, he was just living his life, to the best of his ability, as far as I'm going to punch in, go to work, do my job, punch out, go home. And that's kind of how a lot of us are, And I was having a discussion with my wife earlier about election polling, and she was commenting about how election polling is so skewed because the people that they call are being called at specific hours or certain hours, and it's skewing the polls the wrong way. Whereas the working class folks, those folks that are having the 2 or 3 jobs, they're not home to answer those phone calls. And in a lot of cases, they're not getting those phone calls on their cell phones. And if they are getting them on their cell phones, they're not answering because they're working, or it comes up as an unrecognizable number and they don't respond.
I was going to say, I don't even have to be working. I'm just not going to answer.
So they're not going to answer those polls and say, candidate A is my choice over candidate B. The folks that are at home, after 5, they're going to be answering. Or the folks that are at home all day, maybe retirees, stay-at-home parents, they're answering, and they have different considerations than the men and women that are working at the auto plant for 12 hours or working at the Amazon facility for God knows how long. So they can't really comment on those things, and that's kind of really what it would end up being. If I work for Amazon, no offense to Amazon, but if I work for Amazon, my perspective on Amazon and their labor practices is different than somebody who's a Prime member and just wants their shit the next day.
Absolutely, or the same day.
So they're going to look at it as, well, I don't see what the big problem is. They're innovators. They're doing all this great stuff. They're doing these things, but then they'll get mad at AOC for saying they don't need to set up shop here because they're going to get a big tax break and they're going to take advantage of the local labor and not pay them a fair wage. And speaking about that, for a lot of people, they're not ready to hear that type of stuff. I've listened to some of the people respond and say, this was going to be a great windfall for the local property owners and all these other, but they weren't seeing the long run, which was what you see at a lot of these other facilities, which is it's hell for a lot of these people that are working there.
And that goes back to the whole what's in it for me mentality we've been talking about, and like Beardo, as you called him, and how he rises up, it's the same sort of thing. It's, well, it doesn't matter that these workers have shitty conditions because I'm not
Right.
there, but what do I get out of it? I get property value. So you always have that difference in opinion anyway, based solely off of what am I getting out of this.
Yeah, it's just like the argument 10, 15 years ago about Walmart with, the same conditions. Working long hours, very low pay, benefits non-existent, or at least not there as much as what you would have in a traditional full-time or even part-time job. But yeah, the craziest thing to me with respect to the glasses is this idea of truth, or the concept of truth. And being a historian, a lot of us, or at least some of us, laugh at this idea of truth because there becomes that question of, with respect to truth is going to have to, you have data itself, or data, depending on how you want to say it, GIF. You have data that's going to tell you, as far as quantitatively, 1 + 1 = 2. That's the truth. There's no other way you can argue it. But you also have this other aspect of truth, which is the way I see it. If I happen to write something, a certain message down, what did I mean by what I said or what I wrote? And, that even gets into what we're talking about with this film. What the hell does John Carpenter actually mean? He could have just looked at it and said, you know what? I just want to make a fun movie with aliens and all types of shit. Whereas we're arguing there are a lot of layers to it. And I'd even pull out an old Charlie Chaplin quote, which is, don't look for any social or political meaning in my films because there is none. And you know that he's full of shit because if you watch his movies, all of his movies, you see there's some political, social commentary in his films.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we don't have to worry about that with Carpenter. I mean, Carpenter has gone on record as saying that They Live is a documentary on the exploitation of the poor by the upper class and the rampant economic inequality that makes it possible. Yes, I did just read that. But I find that so fascinating that he's literally saying, this is not a joke, this is not fake, This is real, this is what's happening. So to touch on what you just said about the truth and how we see it, one of the things I love most about this film is how hard they work to make you think that Holly is a good guy. And, she's helping Nada for so long, and then you get to the end of the film, and she just blasts Frank. Right. And then she's going after Nada. And they do this thing that's fantastic where they use the glasses and look at her, and she's not an alien, so she can't possibly be a bad guy. And I love that, and I think that's such a nice touch to just basically try to distract the audience, so to speak. And I think it's great, but I mean, we should have realized as soon as she lived in a nice house that Carpenter was probably going to make her one of the bad guys.
Yeah, with the whole idea of being able to see her and trust her, at the moment that at least Beardo shows up and that humans are involved in this, all of our alarms should be going off and saying like, well, fuck it, she's helping, you know what, I shouldn't trust her, something's going on. And then Frank gets shot, and then she goes and it's assumed that she kills Nada. I mean, maybe he survives, turns around, shoots her, but he blows up the satellite dish and wakes up the world, or at least wakes up that local area. But it's reassuring that you get to see that there are people that are participating at this, at least participating with this ruse, from different walks of life and different backgrounds. So it's not just in the case of the bearded man, it's not just this, cisgender white male. It's women are going to be involved. I mean, if you were to update this to 2019, there would be a very colorful group of people that would be part of this whole idea of, keeping everybody shielded from the truth, or keeping everybody, asleep for that matter. But yeah, that whole idea of truth, or even shying away from the truth, reinventing truth, things like that. truth just becomes what everybody agrees it is. So if everyone is
Wow, that's
agreeing,
really deep and powerful.
this is our life, this is where we are. That, I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's the truth of that at that moment. And it's not until you find something to get enough people to understand that the truth is something else, you're not going to get anybody to deviate. You're not going to get society to deviate from that accepted truth. I mean, I live in the South, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about the truth around here. Oh, one last thing I think we definitely need to talk about is this idea of why aliens. Why can't it just be it's the bearded man, it's the woman, it's humans all together that are part of this ruse on the poor and the working class, as opposed to, well, shit, it just happened to be aliens that came down generations ago. They want to live here, but they got to hide among us so we don't kill them. And what they understand is they're going to go ahead and fool enough people into believing all these things, or at least going along with American society, or this idea of an American dream, or whatever else they want to claim. I mean, because is it because in the 1980s aliens are popular, or is there something else that's going on that Carpenter himself kind of latches on about? Maybe we're not ready to believe that we're the bad guys, or at least bad guys exist among us.
For me, what it came down to was it was a way to sell it as a sci-fi movie instead. If you just came straight out and said, hey, I made this social commentary movie and it's going to tell you how bad consumerism is, I don't think that many people would have gone to it. But when it was marketed as this heavy sci-fi feel to it, especially in the 80s when everybody was all over that kind of stuff, I think that was a way to bring that in. I think it could have been any monster. I think you still need the way to show the difference between the humans and the people with no humanity left at all. But I do feel that the sci-fi was more just to get people's butts in the seats.
Well, even at least with all those 80s movies and TV shows or whatever, you had not just this film, but you had things like V, hell, for that matter, a lot of the Star Trek episodes themselves involved aliens that looked like humans. What was that film? Galaxy Quest, that came out in the late 90s. The aliens had to present themselves looking kind of humanoid in order for you to not be scared of them. And these were the good aliens. It's like, look, this is what they all look like, these amorphous blobs, but they presented themselves with humanoid features, so the humans themselves did not get scared. And with V, it's that very deliberate attempt to look human. I'm not going to show you my lizard skin. You're going to get no idea that I happen to be an alien. Hey, we look just like you. You can empathize with us. You can understand who we are. We look just like all of you, so we definitely can't be bad. And that kind of goes into, we talked about immigration policy earlier. If it's immigrants that look like us, whoever us is, if it's immigrants that look like us, we're more sympathetic to them. We don't see them as the other. We don't see them as bad. And then, unfortunately, when we do see them as the other, it becomes this argument, as opposed to, they're deserving of dignity. It becomes this argument of, hey, man, they just want to come here and work. Whereas the argument should just be, you don't need to add that to it. It should just be, these people deserve humanity and empathy just like everybody else, not, hey, if they want to come here and work and do the jobs that nobody else wants to do, let them come here. Because then it comes down to, again, about what Carpenter was talking about, of exploitation. They're only welcome if they're going to be doing stuff that nobody else wants to do, as opposed to they should be welcomed from the beginning.
Absolutely. That goes back to what's in it for me. So one of the last things I want to touch on is Nada's final scene. He's laying on the ground, presumably dying, and he lifts a middle finger to the camera. And it's his way of telling the aliens to go fuck themselves, but it's also Carpenter's way of telling Reagan and all of consumerism to go fuck itself. And I read an interview with Piper today, and I thought it was very interesting. Piper was upset that he kind of put up a weak, bent middle finger. And if he could have redone it, he would have done a super strong, straight up and down middle finger to really get the point across. And I thought that was amazing.
Well, and that's a great thing that any artist is going to throw in. And there are a lot of people that I guess have this selective amnesia with respect to artists of any sort, whether we're talking about writers, directors, comedians, singers, where they give this viewpoint of, well, I don't want my stuff to be political, but all of your stuff is political, whether you realize it or not. And this idea of at least the consumerism of the 1980s, where it's not just about consuming the material, but it's also about consuming this image or consuming and presenting an image that other people are going to consume as well, to demonstrate that you fit, that you somehow are not different. You're different and unique by, even though you happen to adhere to the same stuff as everybody else. Nonconformity eventually becomes conformity, just like everything else. But this idea that to be a good American, you got to go out and spend money. You got, even in Stranger Things, they explored that idea of the shopping malls of the 1980s and how that became, I don't want to say a cultural phenomenon, but it became part of American culture, to where it wasn't just about shopping. It was about the experience of going to these places that are really nothing more than shrines to capitalism. Here's all the shit that
Absolutely.
you can buy. In fact, if you can't
Well,
buy
and it even became an experience.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you have the Mall of America.
What do you mean you weren't at the mall? You didn't see this?
Uh-huh.
You weren't at the mall on Friday? You didn't see what happened?
And I can't speak for you, but I know I got caught up in this when I was in the late 80s, early 90s, and it had just moved. And my thing was, oh, where's the mall? Where's the mall? My mom was working class, so it wasn't an issue of like, oh, we're going to go spend our free time in the mall. But that was where I knew all the people I went to school with were going to be on Friday, Saturday, and probably on Sunday as well, but at least Friday and Saturday. And they're going to hang out. They're going to go to the arcade, hang out at the food court, go into, a few shops or stores and just look at stuff because you didn't have any money to go and buy it. But that became part of this consumer culture. It was also about shopping itself. Wasn't about buying. Shopping was about going out to the places where you could buy stuff. And that in itself was buying into this new idea, this new part of this identity, where you had to be part of it. And if you're not part of it, there is something inherently wrong with you. To the point where even in the post 9/11 world, you're being taught again in the recovery that we have after 9/11 by people like George W. Bush, that what you need to do is go out and shop. That's how you beat the terrorists, which at the time I thought was a stupid thing, and as currently I still think is stupid, because his perspective was the way to defeat terrorism is by going to the mall and shopping. Keep being a consumer. We will defeat these terrorists through capitalism. And again, it made no sense as far as foreign policy, it made no sense as far as military policy, but there were a lot of people looked at it and said, well, shit, I'm going to go out and shop. I'm going to show those terrorists.
Well, and I think it does play into what we're talking about here, though, because it's the same sort of thing. It's don't pay attention to the war. Don't pay attention to what we're doing as we jack other countries' resources or whatever else in the name of revenge. Consume, obey, sleep.
And that was the key to it. It doesn't do anything for the actual mission. What it does is it makes sure that the left hand doesn't see what the right hand's doing. Or if you're not paying enough attention to the news, because you're caught up in your own life, great. Okay, you've overextended yourself in your credit cards. It happens. Here, take out this loan or this micro loan or this home equity loan on your house to pay that off. Oh, great! You lost your house. Well, that's the problem with that's one of the downsides of capitalism.
Maybe you shouldn't have lived outside of your means, buddy.
Well, of course, because those are the lessons that come afterwards. But yeah, as far as giving a middle finger to Reagan and capitalism or consumerism itself, the film does a great job in discussing that, because it from the beginning of putting those glasses on until that last moment, until the credits roll, you get this idea that at least what you're buying, not the material good, but this lie that we're buying into, of America is the place of opportunity. America is the place of prosperity. This is a place where you can get whatever you want. You can own whatever you want. You can live however you want. Those folks that are living check to check know that's bullshit. The folks that are living in those camps, those homeless camps, those homeless areas, know it's bullshit, because they're not concerned with, getting the next pair of jeans or the next pair of shoes. They're concerned with that next meal, and they're concerned with, with that next day as far as what's going to unfold. And at least in this film, you get to see the visibility, or at least homelessness and homeless people become visible to you. But unfortunately, they become invisible by the end of the film, because it shows you kind of that progression of American society, where those people that don't matter get brushed to the side. Those people that don't matter get silenced, become invisible, and they become crushed in the cogs of capitalism, or consumerism for that matter. Because who's to say that camp itself wasn't run over, or at least gotten rid of, in order to build some luxury apartments, or a shopping mall, or Starbucks.
It was inevitably a shopping mall so that there'd be more consuming. Speaking of consuming, I want to send a big shout out to John Carpenter for making this film so that I would pay to watch it, and pay for a t-shirt, and pay for a pair of socks that have "They Live" aliens on them. Consume, consume, consume. And we hope that you continue to consume next week, when we come back with an episode all about Jordan Peele and his two big films, Get Out and Us.
I'm going to bring some tea and some scissors.
I'm going to bring Fruit Loops and a cup of milk.
Just as long as you mix them together, you don't eat them like a psychopath and then drink out of the straw while you look at potential NBA prospects on your laptop.
I told
you, I did not trust Rose the moment I saw that she had tall gums. It's a rule. If you have eyes, certain types of eyes and tall gums, I automatically assume you're a villain.
As you should.
Or if you happen to be Catherine
Well, we'll
Keener.
talk more about that next week. I am James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
And thank you for joining this inaugural episode of the Necronama.com.